The crystal chandeliers of Millbrook Country Club cast golden light across the charity gala as my girlfriend Sarah adjusted her simple black dress. I was finally ready to introduce her to my parents when Dad's voice boomed across the marble foyer. "Get us the owner right now," he yelled at the staff, his face red with rage. "She don't belong here." Mom's shrill voice joined in, pointing directly at Sarah. "Remove her immediately." I stood frozen, watching my world collapse in real time while Sarah remained perfectly calm. The club manager approached with a knowing smile, addressing Sarah with obvious respect. "Mom, how would you like to handle your family's membership?" Their confident expressions crumbled instantly. 6 months earlier, I never could have imagined this moment would arrive. "My name is Ned, and I teach English literature at Roosevelt High School for $42,000 a year. I live in a modest apartment, drive a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, and shop at discount grocery stores to make ends meet. The country club world was as foreign to me as ancient Rome, yet here I stood watching my parents destroy everything that mattered to me. I met Sarah on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at Corner Cafe, a little coffee shop near campus where teachers grade papers and students cram for exams. She sat alone at a corner table, typing on an old laptop while nursing a simple black coffee. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore faded jeans with a green sweater that had seen better days. She looked like any graduate student or young professional trying to make it in the world. When her laptop battery died and she looked around desperately for an outlet, I offered to share the power strip at my table. We started talking about the book she was reading, which happened to be one I taught in my American literature class. Her insights were brilliant, thoughtful, and completely genuine. She had this way of seeing characters as real people with complex motivations rather than just symbols in a story. What drew me to Sarah wasn't her appearance, though she was naturally beautiful in an understated way. It was her authenticity. She listened when people talked, remembered details about their lives, and asked follow-up questions that showed she truly cared. When the barista accidentally gave her the wrong order, she thanked him anyway and drank the vanilla latte instead of her usual black coffee. When an elderly man struggled to reach a book from a high shelf, she immediately stood up to help him. Our first real date was a walk through Riverside Park, followed by pizza at Tony's, where we split a $12 pie and talked for 3 hours. She insisted on paying her half, and when I protested, she laughed and said she believed in equality. She drove a modest blue Honda Civic with a few minor dents and a bumper sticker that read, "Be kind." Her apartment was small but cozy, filled with books and photographs of animals from the shelter where she volunteered every weekend. For months, I thought Sarah was like me, a working person trying to build a decent life on a modest income. She shopped at Target, clipped coupons, and got excited about finding a good deal on clearance clothes. When we went out to dinner, she always suggested affordable places and seemed genuinely happy splitting appetizers to save money. She never mentioned expensive hobbies, designer brands, or luxury vacations. The truth is, I was relieved. My parents, Richard and Patricia, had always been obsessed with social status, despite their own modest circumstances. Dad sold insurance for Midwest Family Protection, making about $55,000 a year on a good year. Mom worked as a teller at First National Bank, earning $38,000 annually. Together, they managed a middle-class lifestyle, but they dreamed of something much bigger. When I was growing up, every conversation at dinner focused on who was moving up in the world and who was falling behind. Mom would spend hours reading society pages in the local newspaper, memorizing names of prominent families and their charitable activities. Dad would drive us past expensive neighborhoods, pointing out which houses belonged to his clients and speculating about their net worth. 3 years ago, they made the decision that would eventually lead to tonight's disaster. They joined Millbrook Country Club through their payment plan program, which allowed middle-income families to spread membership costs over 5 years. The initiation fee alone was $25,000, with monthly dues of $800. To afford this, they canceled family vacations, drove older cars, and ate more meals at home. But it was worth it to them, because membership at Millbrook meant access to the social circle they had always craved. They could attend charity galas, play golf with business owners, and drop casual mentions of our country club into conversations with neighbors and coworkers. For Mom and Dad, it represented everything they thought success should look like. They never asked about Sarah's background beyond basic questions about her job and education. When I mentioned she worked in business consulting, they assumed she was probably a junior analyst or administrative assistant. When I said she went to good schools, They figured she had student loans like everyone else. The fact that she dressed modestly and lived simply confirmed their assumptions about her financial situation. If I had told them the truth about Sarah's background, they never would have believed me anyway. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore was the sole heir to Whitmore Textiles, a company her great-grandfather founded in 1923. The business had grown from a small cotton mill into a multinational corporation with factories across the Southeast and distribution centers in 42 states. When her parents died in a car accident 7 years ago, Sarah inherited not just the company but also real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and a trust fund worth more than most small towns. But Sarah deliberately kept her wealth hidden from everyone except her closest advisors. She had grown up watching people change around her family, becoming fake and calculating when they learned about the money. College friends who discovered her background suddenly became overly interested in expensive restaurants and shopping trips. Men she dated would research her net worth online and then start suggesting costly activities she should pay for since she could afford it. After her parents' funeral, Sarah made a conscious decision to live as normally as possible. She kept a small apartment instead of the family mansion, drove an ordinary car instead of luxury vehicles, and wore simple clothes that could have come from any department store. She wanted to be loved for who she was as a person, not what she owned as an heiress. The irony of tonight's situation was almost unbearable. My parents were attacking the one person who could have given them everything they had ever dreamed of having. Sarah owned not just stocks in Millbrook Country Club but controlling interest in the entire operation. She also owned 2 other country clubs in the region and had silent partnerships in several more. The charity gala we were attending was actually funding scholarships that Sarah had personally established and continued to support with annual donations of more than $2 million. As I watched my father continue his tirade and my mother make cutting remarks about Sarah's appearance, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was about to change forever. The woman they were trying to humiliate was the same person who had quietly arranged for my school to receive a grant for new computer equipment, though I had never connected her involvement to that unexpected funding. She was the person who had donated money to fix the roof on the community center where I coached weekend basketball for underprivileged kids, though the donation had come through an anonymous foundation. Sarah had been quietly improving the lives of everyone around her, including mine, without ever asking for credit or recognition. And now my parents were demanding her removal from a place she actually owned. Dad's voice grew louder as he gestured wildly at Sarah, drawing stares from elegantly dressed guests who had paid $500 per plate to attend tonight's fundraiser. "This is exactly what's wrong with society today," he announced to anyone within earshot. "People think they can just show up anywhere and act like they belong." Mom nodded vigorously, her carefully styled blonde hair catching the light as she turned to address nearby club members. "We've been part of this community for 3 years," she declared with misplaced pride. "We know quality when we see it, and this young woman clearly doesn't meet our standards." I watched Sarah's reaction carefully, amazed by her composure. She stood with perfect posture, her hands clasped calmly in front of her, making no effort to defend herself or argue back. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene, as if she were watching a mildly interesting television program rather than being publicly attacked by my own parents. Other guests began gathering at a respectful distance, their conversations growing quieter as they focused on the unfolding drama. I recognized several faces from local news coverage of community events. There was Judge Morrison from the county courthouse, Dr. Patricia Webb, who ran the Children's Hospital, and Senator Reynolds, who represented our district in the state legislature. These were exactly the people my parents had joined the club to impress. And instead they were witnessing Richard and Patricia's complete meltdown. "Look at that dress," Mom continued, her voice carrying across the marble foyer, clearly purchased at some discount store. "And those shoes are obviously not leather. How did security even let her through the front door?" The irony was staggering. Sarah's simple black dress was actually handmade by a designer in New York, though she had deliberately chosen something understated for tonight. Her shoes were Italian leather, custom-fitted, though they looked like modest flats to the casual observer. Even her simple pearl earrings were family heirlooms worth more than my parents' annual income. But appearances weren't the real issue here. As I watched my parents' performance, I began to see something darker underneath their social climbing aspirations. This wasn't just snobbery or misplaced pride. This was fear and desperation dressed up as righteous indignation. Club manager William Thompson approached our growing circle with a concerned expression carrying a manila envelope marked with official-looking stamps. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of managing wealthy clientele. His approach was professional but clearly focused on my mother, Mrs. Reynolds, he said politely, using Mom's maiden name rather than her married name. I was hoping to speak with you privately this evening about some important club business. Mom's face went white as she quickly reached for the envelope, trying to hide it behind her purse. But I caught a glimpse of the return address and official seal before she could conceal it completely. It was from the club's membership office, and the words "Final Notice" were clearly visible in red letters across the top. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. My parents weren't just embarrassing themselves with their attack on Sarah. They were facing their own crisis that made their behavior even more desperate and pathetic. During a quick trip to the restroom, I managed to corner Dad near the men's lounge. "What's going on with that envelope?" I demanded, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. His confident facade cracked for just a moment, revealing exhaustion and worry underneath. "It's nothing," he insisted, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. "Just some administrative paperwork about membership renewals." But I knew my father well enough to recognize when he was lying. The same expression had crossed his face when he told me everything was fine during my senior year of high school, right before I learned he had been laid off from his previous job for 6 months. The same look appeared when he claimed our family vacation was canceled due to scheduling conflicts, though I later discovered they had emptied their savings account to pay for my college expenses. Later that evening, through conversations with other family members, I would learn the full scope of their financial disaster. 3 months earlier, Dad had lost his biggest insurance client when Riverside Manufacturing decided to switch to a larger agency that could handle their expanding operations. That single account had represented almost 40% of his annual commission income, a loss of nearly $22,000. Around the same time, Mom's bank had implemented cost-cutting measures that reduced staff hours and eliminated overtime opportunities. Her income dropped from $38,000 to roughly $31,000 annually, just when they needed every penny to maintain their club membership payments. Rather than admit their financial struggles to friends and family, they had chosen to maintain appearances at any cost. They maxed out 3 credit cards to cover monthly club dues, borrowed against Dad's life insurance policy, and even took a second mortgage on their house to avoid defaulting on their membership agreement. The cruel irony of their situation was becoming clear. They were attacking Sarah because they desperately needed to feel superior to someone, anyone, who might threaten their precarious social standing. In their minds, if Sarah didn't belong at the club, then their own membership remained valid and meaningful. But if Sarah was actually their social equal or superior, then their entire investment in country club prestige was built on a foundation of delusion. Mom had been increasingly anxious about their financial situation, though she tried to hide it behind cheerful conversations about club events and social activities. She had started clipping coupons obsessively, shopping at outlet stores for clothes that looked expensive enough for club functions, and making excuses to avoid costly social obligations with their new country club friends. Dad had become more aggressive about pursuing new insurance clients, cold calling potential customers, and pushing hard sales tactics that alienated prospects. His desperation was obvious to potential clients, which only made his situation worse as his professional reputation suffered. The membership payment plan that had seemed so reasonable 3 years ago now felt like a crushing burden that threatened to destroy everything they had worked to build. The monthly dues of $800, combined with additional costs for meals, guest passes, and special events, had become an impossible strain on their reduced income. But the worst part was their growing realization that the social acceptance they had purchased wasn't real or lasting. Other club members were polite but distant, treating them as newcomers who didn't quite understand the unwritten rules of country club society. They attended events but rarely received invitations to private gatherings. They participated in club activities but weren't included in the informal networks where real relationships were built. Their membership had given them access to facilities and events, but it hadn't delivered the genuine social connection they had craved. Instead, they found themselves constantly worried about saying the wrong thing, wearing inappropriate clothes, or revealing their middle-class backgrounds through some inadvertent mistake. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight, I was bringing a girlfriend to introduce to their country club circle, and they had planned to use the occasion to demonstrate their social sophistication and insider status. They had invited several acquaintances to join our table, hoping to show off their son's relationship as evidence of their family's rising social position. Instead, they were destroying everything with their public attack on the one person who could have solved all their problems. The woman they were trying to humiliate was not only wealthy enough to pay their membership dues without noticing the expense, but she was also kind enough to consider helping them if they had simply treated her with basic human decency. As I watched them continue their verbal assault on Sarah, I felt a mixture of embarrassment, anger, and genuine sadness for their situation. They had sacrificed so much to join this world, and now they were destroying their chances of remaining in it through their own fear and desperation. Club manager William Thompson returned to our growing circle of spectators with an expression I couldn't quite read. He approached Sarah directly, completely bypassing my parents despite their continued demands for attention. His demeanor was respectful, almost deferential, as he addressed her in a tone I had never heard him use with other club members. "Miss Whitmore," he said clearly, his voice carrying across the marble foyer. "I sincerely apologize for this disruption to your evening. How would you prefer to handle this situation?" The effect of those two words, "Miss Whitmore," was immediate and electric. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as nearby guests turned to stare at Sarah with new recognition. The Whitmore name was legendary in our region, synonymous with textile manufacturing, philanthropic foundations, and generational wealth that predated most of the families represented at tonight's gala. My parents' expressions shifted from confident indignation to confused alarm as they began to process what they had just heard. Dad's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, while Mom clutched her purse more tightly as if it could somehow anchor her to reality. Sarah's response was measured and gracious. "Thank you, William. I think this situation requires delicate handling. Perhaps we should allow family dynamics to resolve naturally before taking any formal action." But before William could respond, a commotion erupted near the club's main dining room as another drama demanded immediate attention. Harrison Phillips, a member known for his excessive drinking and inappropriate behavior, had cornered two young servers near the bar and was making loud, crude comments about their appearances. I watched Sarah's transformation as she became aware of the situation. The quiet, modest woman I had been dating for 6 months suddenly displayed a commanding presence I had never witnessed before. Without hesitation, she walked directly toward the disturbance, her posture straight and her pace determined. "Mr. Phillips," she said firmly, approaching the intoxicated man with complete confidence. "Your behavior is unacceptable and makes our staff uncomfortable. I need you to apologize to these young women and return to your table immediately." Harrison turned toward Sarah with bleary eyes and an arrogant sneer. He was a large man in his late 50s, accustomed to using his size and wealth to intimidate others. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" he slurred, stepping closer to Sarah in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "I've been a member here longer than you've been alive." Sarah remained perfectly calm, showing no sign of fear or uncertainty. "I understand you've been drinking this evening, which might explain your confusion about appropriate behavior. However, your membership status doesn't give you permission to harass our employees." "Our employees?" Harrison laughed mockingly. "Listen, sweetheart. I don't know who you think you are, but you're obviously new here. Let me explain how things work at this club." Sarah simply nodded to William, who immediately signaled to 2 security guards positioned discreetly near the entrance. The guards were professionals, dressed in dark suits that made them nearly invisible until action was required. They moved toward Harrison with smooth efficiency, positioning themselves on either side of him without making any threatening gestures. "Mr. Phillips," William announced in a clear, authoritative voice, "your membership privileges are suspended pending a review by the board of directors. Please gather your belongings and leave the premises immediately." Harrison's face turned red as he looked around the room, apparently expecting support from other members. Instead, he found expressions of disgust and disapproval. Several prominent women, including the mayor's wife and 2 city council members, were watching with obvious approval of Sarah's intervention. "You can't throw me out," Harrison protested, his voice rising to a shout. "I pay $15,000 a year for my membership. I know the owners of this place personally." Sarah's response was quiet, but carried clearly across the now silent dining room. "Mr. Phillips, I am the owner of this place. Your membership is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to your car and ensure you leave safely." The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in the dining room, including my parents, now understood exactly who Sarah was and what she represented. The guards escorted Harrison toward the exit with professional efficiency, while he continued to protest and threaten legal action. As Sarah returned to where we stood, other club members approached her with warm greetings and obvious respect. Senator Reynolds thanked her for handling the situation so professionally. Dr. Webb mentioned her appreciation for the scholarship program Sarah had funded at the medical school. Judge Morrison praised her family's long history of community service and ethical business practices. I watched my girlfriend accept these compliments with gracious humility, deflecting praise and redirecting conversations toward the achievements of others. This was clearly a role she had played many times before, though she had never mentioned any of it during our 6 months together. Mom and Dad stood frozen in the middle of this social whirlwind, finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of their mistake. The woman they had demanded be removed from the club was not only a member, but the actual owner of the entire property. The person they had insulted and humiliated could decide their future membership status with a single word to William. But perhaps most devastating of all was their realization that their own son had been dating someone they could never have imagined meeting, let alone insulting. The social status they had sacrificed everything to achieve was standing right in front of them, and they had just spent 20 minutes trying to destroy it. As Sarah fielded questions and greetings from genuine admirers, I noticed Mom clutching that manila envelope even more tightly. The irony was becoming almost unbearable. Sarah could solve their financial crisis with the change in her purse, but their behavior had likely eliminated any possibility of her assistance. I found myself looking at Sarah with new eyes, trying to reconcile the modest woman who volunteered at animal shelters with the confident business owner who had just removed a disruptive member without breaking a sweat. How had I not seen this side of her personality? How had she managed to hide such enormous wealth and influence for so long? But even as I struggled with these questions, I realized that the fundamental person I had fallen in love with hadn't changed. Sarah was still kind, still genuine, and still more interested in talking about my students' progress than discussing business deals or social obligations. The difference was that I now understood the incredible effort she had made to live a normal life and build authentic relationships. My parents, however, were discovering that their definition of normal had been completely wrong. They had spent 3 years trying to buy their way into a social class that Sarah had inherited and then chosen to transcend. They had sacrificed financial security for country club access, while Sarah had given up obvious displays of wealth for emotional authenticity. The contrast couldn't have been more stark or more humbling for everyone involved. As the immediate drama around Harrison's ejection settled down, Mom grabbed Dad's arm and whispered urgently in his ear about the envelope she was still trying to hide. I could see panic spreading across both their faces as they realized their precarious position had become exponentially worse. Dad cleared his throat and attempted to approach Sarah with a completely different demeanor than he had displayed just minutes earlier. Gone was the aggressive, demanding tone, replaced by an awkward attempt at charm that fooled nobody in our immediate vicinity. "Sarah," he began, stumbling slightly over her name as if he had never said it before. "I think there might have been some misunderstanding here tonight. You know how it is with family dynamics and all that." Sarah turned toward him with polite attention, though her expression remained cool and professional. "Mr. Reynolds," she replied, using his last name rather than inviting any presumption of familiarity. "I'm listening." Mom jumped in with a forced laugh that sounded more like a nervous giggle. "We were just being protective parents, you understand. Ned is our only son, and we want the best for him. Sometimes we get a little over-enthusiastic about meeting his girlfriends." The attempt to reframe their public attack as parental concern was so transparent that several nearby club members exchanged glances of disbelief. Senator Reynolds, who had been engaged in conversation with Judge Morrison, paused to listen to the unfolding exchange with obvious interest. "I see," Sarah responded neutrally. "And you felt that demanding my removal from the club was an appropriate way to express parental concern." Dad's face reddened, but he pressed forward with his clumsy damage control attempt. "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds much harsher than we intended. We just wanted to make sure Ned was associating with the right kind of people, you understand." The irony of his statement hung in the air like smoke. Here was a man who had borrowed against his life insurance to afford country club membership, lecturing the actual owner of the club about appropriate associations. Mom decided to try a different approach, one that revealed even more about their desperate situation. "The truth is, Sarah, we're going through some challenging times right now. Sometimes when people are stressed about money, They don't always express themselves in the best way. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly at this unexpected admission. I'm sorry to hear you're experiencing financial difficulties, Mrs. Reynolds. That must be very stressful for your family. Oh, it's nothing we can't handle. Mom backtracked quickly, realizing she had revealed more than intended. Just temporary setbacks that happen to everyone. We're very resilient people. But William Thompson chose that moment to approach Mom again with the manila envelope, clearly unwilling to let club business remain unresolved any longer. Mrs. Reynolds, I really do need to discuss this matter with you this evening. The board has asked me to resolve all outstanding membership issues before the end of the month. Mom's face went pale as she realized she could no longer avoid the conversation. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, she suggested, glancing nervously at the growing circle of observers. Actually, Sarah interjected gently, since this involves family, and I'm apparently part of the family now, perhaps it would be appropriate for me to understand the full situation. William looked to Sarah for guidance, clearly recognizing her authority in the matter. She nodded slightly, and he proceeded to explain the contents of the envelope in terms that made the severity of the situation clear to everyone present. The club has not received membership dues for the past 3 months, William announced in a professional but sympathetic tone. According to our payment agreement, any member who falls more than 90 days behind faces automatic suspension and potential termination of membership privileges. Mom's attempt to maintain dignity crumbled, as she realized their humiliating secret was now public knowledge among the very people they had joined the club to impress. We've just had some temporary cash flow issues, she said weakly. We fully intend to catch up on our payments as soon as possible. Dad tried to take control of the conversation, apparently believing his sales experience could somehow salvage the situation. Look, we've been good members for 3 years. We participate in club events. We follow all the rules, and we contribute to the community atmosphere here. Surely the club can work with us on a payment schedule. But his desperation was obvious to everyone listening, and his attempt to negotiate from a position of strength fell flat when everyone knew he had no leverage whatsoever. The club had dozens of qualified applicants waiting for membership opportunities, and the Reynolds family brought no special value that would justify special treatment. Sarah listened to this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. I could see her processing the information, understanding not just the financial facts but the emotional devastation my parents were experiencing. Despite their earlier behavior toward her, she seemed to recognize their situation as genuinely tragic rather than simply embarrassing. How much is the outstanding balance? She asked William directly. $2,400 for the past 3 months, plus late fees and administrative costs, William replied. The total amount due is approximately $2,800. I watched Sarah's reaction carefully, knowing that such an amount was essentially meaningless to someone with her wealth. $2,800 was probably less than she spent on flowers for charity events. But for my parents, it represented an insurmountable crisis that threatened to destroy everything they had worked to build. Mom's eyes filled with tears as the full scope of their humiliation became clear. Not only had they publicly attacked the club's owner, but they had done so while being unable to afford their own membership. The social standing they had sacrificed so much to achieve was crumbling in front of the very people they had hoped to impress. We don't expect charity, Dad said stiffly, though his voice lacked conviction. We just need a little more time to get back on our feet financially. But even as he spoke, I could see him calculating the impossibility of their situation. With their reduced income and maxed-out credit, there was no realistic path to coming up with $2,800 in the immediate future. Even if they managed to scrape together the overdue amount, they would face the same problem again next month, when regular dues came due. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone present realized that the Reynolds family was facing not just temporary embarrassment, but complete social exile from the world they had spent 3 years trying to enter. Their membership would be terminated, their investment in country club prestige would be lost, and they would return to their middle-class lives with significant debt and damaged pride. Sarah looked around the circle of observers, then back at my parents with an expression of genuine compassion. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, would you be willing to join me for a private conversation? I think there might be some things we should discuss away from the public setting. But before they could respond, Dad's desperation overtook what remained of his judgment. Instead of accepting Sarah's gracious offer for a private discussion, he reached out and grabbed her wrist in an attempt to force immediate attention to his demands. We need to resolve this right now, he insisted, his grip tightening as Sarah tried to pull away. You have the power to fix this situation immediately, and I'm not leaving until we reach an understanding. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and dramatic. Security guards who had been standing discreetly at the perimeter immediately moved toward our group, while club members stepped back in shock at Dad's physical aggression toward Sarah. Sarah's voice cut through the tension with crystal clarity. Sir, you will release my wrist immediately, or security will remove you from the premises. But Dad's panic had completely overwhelmed his judgment. Not until you agree to help us, he demanded, seeming oblivious to the gasps of outrage from nearby club members. You're rich enough to solve our problems without even noticing the expense. That was the moment when I finally found my voice and my courage. The sight of my father physically restraining my girlfriend while making demands for her money crossed every line of decency and respect I had been raised to value. Dad, let go of her right now, I said firmly, stepping between them and forcing him to release his grip on Sarah's wrist. This behavior is completely unacceptable. The confrontation with my father marked a turning point I hadn't seen coming but couldn't avoid any longer. As I positioned myself protectively between Sarah and my parents, I realized this moment would define not just our family relationships but my own character for years to come. Ned, don't let her manipulate you, Dad pleaded, his voice taking on a desperate edge that made him sound like a stranger. Can't you see what's happening here? She's been deceiving you about who she really is. How do you know anything about her is genuine? Mom stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks, her carefully applied makeup now smeared and running. Honey, we're just trying to protect you from getting hurt. Rich people don't really care about working families like us. Shay's probably just amusing herself by slumming with a school teacher. Their words stung because they echoed insecurities I had struggled with since learning about Sarah's wealth. How could someone with unlimited resources genuinely care about a man who graded papers until midnight and shopped for groceries with coupons? What did I have to offer someone who could afford anything she wanted? But as I looked at Sarah's face during my parents' attack, I saw something that answered all my doubts. She wasn't angry or indignant about their accusations. Instead, she looked genuinely hurt that people would assume the worst about her motivations. The pain in her expression was real, vulnerable, and completely contrary to the calculating manipulator my parents were describing. Security guards maintained their professional positions while allowing our family conflict to play out, but William Thompson approached with additional information that would make the situation even more complicated. Excuse me, William said quietly, addressing Sarah with obvious reluctance. There's something else you should know about the situation we're dealing with tonight. Sarah nodded for him to continue, though I could see her bracing for whatever additional drama was about to unfold. Over the past several weeks, we've received multiple phone calls from someone attempting to spread negative information about you, William explained. The caller claimed you were pursuing wealthy club members for financial gain and warned other members to be cautious about your intentions. My stomach dropped as I realized what he was describing. Someone had been actively trying to sabotage Sarah's reputation within the club community, spreading rumors designed to damage her relationships with other members. We take all member concerns seriously, William continued. So we investigated the source of these calls. Our phone records indicate they originated from Mrs. Reynolds' number. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My mother had been making anonymous calls to spread malicious lies about the woman I loved. She had been actively working to destroy Sarah's reputation and undermine our relationship while pretending to be supportive during our family dinners and phone conversations. Mom, I said, my voice barely controlled as anger began to overwhelm my shock. Tell me he's wrong. Tell me you didn't do this. Mom's face crumpled as she realized her secret campaign had been exposed. I was trying to protect you, she sobbed. I could see you were falling in love with her, and I was afraid she would hurt you when she got bored with her little experiment. So you decided to hurt her first, I demanded. You called people you don't even know and lied about someone you'd never met. Dad tried to step in as Mom's defender, though his argument only made things worse. We had to do something, Ned. You were completely blind to what was obviously a gold-digging situation. Rich women don't date poor men unless they have some ulterior motive. The irony was so profound it was almost laughable. My parents were accusing the actual gold holder of being a gold digger. They had spent weeks trying to protect me from someone they imagined was after my non-existent money, while that person was wealthy enough to buy and sell our entire neighborhood without noticing the expense. but the deepest cut was their assumption that I had nothing genuine to offer someone of Sarah's caliber. In their minds, the only possible explanation for her interest was manipulation or deception. They couldn't imagine that she might actually value my personality, my intelligence, or my character enough to choose my company over the countless wealthy suitors who undoubtedly pursued her. Other club members began stepping forward to defend Sarah's character, sharing stories that revealed how wrong my parents' assumptions had been. Mrs. Patterson, whose husband owned 3 car dealerships, described Sarah's generous but anonymous donation that had saved the community center's after-school program. Dr. Martinez mentioned Sarah's funding for new equipment at the children's hospital that had improved treatment for hundreds of young patients. Your girlfriend has probably done more for this community in the past 5 years than most of us will accomplish in our entire lifetimes, Senator Reynolds told me directly. She's never asked for credit, never demanded recognition, and never used her wealth as a way to control or manipulate others. As these testimonials continued, I watched my parents' faces transform from defensive anger to growing horror as they realized the scope of their mistake. They had been attacking someone beloved and respected throughout the community, while spreading lies about a woman known for her genuine kindness and generosity. But perhaps most devastating was their gradual understanding that Sarah could have solved their financial problems with a casual gesture, if only they had approached her with honesty and respect instead of hostility and deception. The membership dues that threatened to destroy their social standing represented pocket change to someone who donated millions to charity without expecting public recognition. Mom's breakdown became complete as the full weight of her actions hit her. "I've ruined everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the background noise of the gala. "I've destroyed my son's happiness and humiliated our entire family." Dad wrapped his arms around Mom's shoulders, his own face showing the exhaustion and defeat of a man who had fought a battle he never should have started, against an opponent who had never considered him an enemy. The silence that followed was broken by Sarah's gentle voice, addressing my parents with more compassion than they had shown her throughout the entire evening. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, I understand that you were acting out of love and concern for your son. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't normally consider, and financial stress can bring out the worst in all of us. Her graciousness in the face of their attacks made me love her even more, while simultaneously making me ashamed of my family's behavior. She was offering them understanding and forgiveness when they deserved nothing but anger and rejection. But I need you to understand," Sarah continued firmly, "that your assumptions about my relationship with Ned were completely wrong. I didn't seek him out because of his profession or financial situation. I fell in love with him because he's kind, intelligent, and genuine in ways that have nothing to do with money or social status." I felt a surge of gratitude and love for Sarah's words, but also a deep sadness about the damage that had been done to our family relationships. How could we move forward from this point? How could I maintain a relationship with parents who had tried to destroy the woman I wanted to marry? How could Sarah ever trust my family after what they had put her through? But even as these questions swirled through my mind, I knew my choice was already made. I had seen my parents' true character tonight, but I had also seen Sarah's grace under pressure and her capacity for forgiveness. I knew which future I wanted to build and which values I wanted to represent. Sarah's request for a private family conversation led us to the club's boardroom, an elegantly appointed space overlooking the 18th hole where mahogany panels and oil paintings of club founders created an atmosphere of tradition and permanence. As we settled around the polished conference table, I could see my parents trying to process the events of the evening while preparing for what they probably expected to be their final humiliation. William Thompson had discreetly provided water glasses and arranged for complete privacy, ensuring our family discussion could proceed without interruption or observation. The contrast between this dignified setting and the chaos of the earlier confrontation seemed to help everyone regain some measure of composure. Sarah sat across from my parents with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the evening, though I could see the emotional toll in the slight tension around her eyes. She had been publicly attacked, physically grabbed, and subjected to weeks of malicious rumors, yet she was still willing to extend compassion to the people who had tried to hurt her. "Before we discuss your current situation," Sarah began gently, "I want you to know that I've been aware of your financial difficulties for several months." Mom's face went white as she realized their carefully guarded secret had been discovered long before tonight's confrontation. "How did you know?" she asked weakly. "William keeps me informed about all membership issues. particularly when they involve families of club employees or their relatives," Sarah explained. "When Ned and I began dating seriously, I asked him to monitor your account status so I could step in quietly if assistance became necessary." Dad's pride clearly bristled at the idea of charity, even from someone who could afford it effortlessly. "We didn't ask for your help or your pity," he said stiffly. "No, you didn't," Sarah agreed, "which is exactly why I plan to handle it anonymously through the club's financial assistance program. Many members face temporary hardships, and we have discretionary funds available to help families maintain their memberships during difficult periods." She paused, allowing that information to settle before continuing with an even more surprising revelation. "I was also aware of the phone calls you made to other club members about me." Mom's breakdown became complete as she realized the full scope of Sarah's knowledge about their actions. "You knew what I was doing, and you still planned to help us. I understood that you were afraid," Sarah said simply. "When someone we love appears to be making what we perceive as a dangerous choice, fear can drive us to desperate actions. I've seen it happen many times with families who are concerned about wealth differences in relationships." I found myself staring at Sarah with new admiration and bewilderment. She had known about my parents' financial crisis and their malicious rumors, yet she had continued dating me without mentioning any of it. She had been planning to anonymously solve their problems, while they were actively working to destroy her reputation. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not because I could solve your family's problems," she replied. "And I wanted your parents to have the chance to know me as a person before they learned about my background. I hoped that if they got to know me first, the money would matter less." Sarah went on to explain her own history with family relationships and wealth, painting a picture that helped my parents understand her perspective. She described growing up as the only child of parents who traveled constantly for business, leaving her with nannies and tutors who were paid to care for her but couldn't provide genuine emotional connection. Her teenage years had been spent at an elite boarding school, where friendships were often calculated based on family net worth and social connections. College had been slightly better, but even there she had learned to be cautious about revealing her background after several painful experiences with people who changed their behavior dramatically upon learning about her trust fund. "After my parents died," Sarah continued, her voice growing softer, "I inherited everything, but I also inherited the isolation that comes with that level of wealth. People either want something from you, or they're intimidated by what you represent, or they make assumptions about your character based on your bank account." She described her deliberate choice to live modestly and work anonymously through foundations and charitable organizations to maintain some connection to normal life. Her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her simple apartment, her preference for casual restaurants, were all part of an effort to build authentic relationships based on shared interests rather than financial attraction. "When I met Ned at that coffee shop," she said, looking at me with genuine warmth, "he talked to me about literature and teaching as if I were the most interesting person in the world. He didn't know anything about my background, and he didn't care about impressing me with his own achievements. He just wanted to share his passion for helping students discover great books." Mom was crying openly now, though her tears seemed to represent genuine remorse rather than self-pity. "I've made such a terrible mistake," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting my son, but I was really just projecting my own insecurities and fears." Dad struggled with his own emotions, his voice thick as he spoke. "We spent 3 years trying to buy our way into a world we didn't understand, and we nearly destroyed the one genuine relationship our son has ever had with someone who actually belongs in that world." Sarah's response showed the depth of her character and her understanding of human nature. "The world you were trying to enter doesn't actually exist," she said, gently. "Real relationships aren't based on membership fees or social status. They're built on trust, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being." She went on to explain her original plan to quietly pay their membership dues through an anonymous gift, allowing them to maintain their dignity while removing the financial stress that was clearly affecting their health and happiness. She had also intended to create opportunities for Dad to connect with potential insurance clients through her business network, though she would have presented these as coincidental meetings rather than obvious charity. "I wanted to help because I love your son," she said simply, "and I know how much you mean to him. But I also wanted to help because I believe good people sometimes face circumstances beyond their control, and those who have resources should share them quietly and graciously." The revelation of her planned generosity made my parents' behavior even more tragic and unnecessary. They had attacked their potential savior while struggling with problems she could have solved with a single phone call. Their fear of being looked down upon had caused them to look down on the one person who had never judged them harshly. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's willingness to share her story helped my parents understand that wealth didn't make someone immune to loneliness, rejection, or the need for genuine human connection. She had been as vulnerable to heartbreak as anyone else, perhaps more so because her resources made it difficult to distinguish between authentic affection and opportunistic interest. As our conversation continued, I watched my parents' perspective gradually shift from defensive shame to genuine understanding of the person Sarah actually was beneath the surface wealth. They began to see her not as a threat to their son or their social aspirations, but as a woman who had chosen to love me despite having unlimited options for companionship. Mom finally found the courage to apologize directly, her voice shaking with emotion. "Sarah, I am so deeply sorry for everything I said and did tonight. I was wrong about you, wrong about your motivations, and wrong to interfere in your relationship with my son. You have every right to never forgive me." Dad's apology was shorter but equally heartfelt. "I've made a fool of myself and embarrassed my family by acting out of ignorance and fear. You deserve much better treatment, especially from the family of someone who claims to love you." Sarah's response would stay with me for the rest of my life, demonstrating the kind of person I wanted to become and the kind of marriage I wanted to build with her. She reached across the table and took both my parents' hands in hers, looking directly into their eyes as she spoke. "I forgive you completely," she said, with absolute sincerity. "But more than that, I want you to know that my offer to help still stands. Not because you need charity, but because we're going to be family, and family takes care of each other during difficult times." 6 months after that transformative evening at Millbrook Country Club, I stood in the same boardroom where our family's healing had begun, but this time the occasion was joyous rather than painful. Sarah and I had just finished signing the papers that would establish the Reynolds Family Educational Foundation, a scholarship program designed to help children from working-class families attend college, regardless of their financial circumstances. The foundation represented everything we had learned about using resources responsibly and building bridges between different economic backgrounds. Sarah had insisted that my parents serve as founding board members, recognizing their unique perspective on the challenges faced by middle-income families, trying to provide opportunities for their children. Dad had undergone his own transformation over those 6 months, rebuilding his insurance business with a focus on genuine service rather than desperate sales tactics. Sarah's business network had provided introductions to potential clients, but Dad had earned their trust and loyalty through honest advice and competitive pricing. His annual income had not only recovered but exceeded his previous best year. Mom had discovered a talent for nonprofit administration through her volunteer work with Sarah's charitable organizations. Her attention to detail and genuine empathy for struggling families made her invaluable in evaluating scholarship applications and organizing fundraising events. She had found purpose and fulfillment that went far beyond the superficial social status she had previously sought. But perhaps the most significant change was in our family relationships. The crisis that could have destroyed our connections had instead forced us to confront our true values and priorities. My parents had learned that authentic relationships were more valuable than artificial status symbols, while I had gained confidence in my own worth regardless of my economic circumstances. Sarah had also grown through the experience, discovering that her wealth could be a tool for building connections rather than a barrier to overcome. She had learned to trust my family's genuine affection for her as a person, and she had found joy in sharing her resources in ways that strengthened rather than complicated our relationships. The club membership issue had been resolved within days of our initial confrontation. Sarah had quietly arranged for my parents' dues to be handled through the Foundation's community outreach program, allowing them to maintain their membership while contributing volunteer hours to scholarship activities. Their financial stress had been eliminated, but more importantly, their sense of purpose and dignity had been restored. The malicious phone calls and rumor campaign had been addressed through personal conversations between Sarah and each affected club member. Rather than defending herself or demanding apologies, Sarah had used the situation as an opportunity to discuss the challenges faced by families dealing with economic uncertainty. Several club members had been inspired to contribute to similar charitable efforts in their own communities. My teaching career had also evolved in unexpected directions. Sarah's education foundation had provided funding for technology upgrades and innovative programs at Roosevelt High School, but she had insisted that I apply for and earn a promotion to department head based on my own qualifications. The additional income and responsibilities had given me confidence that I was contributing meaningfully to our relationship beyond just accepting her support. The most profound change, however, was in how we approached our future together. Our engagement announcement had been celebrated by both families without any pretense or concern about social impressions. The wedding planning focused on creating a meaningful ceremony that reflected our shared values rather than displaying wealth or status. We had chosen to have our wedding reception at Millbrook Country Club, not because of its prestige, but because it represented the place where our families had learned to trust and respect each other. William Thompson would serve as master of ceremonies, having become a friend and advisor rather than just a service provider. Harrison Phillips, the member who had been ejected for inappropriate behavior, had attempted to challenge his membership termination through legal action. However, the documentation of his conduct and the support of other members had made his case hopeless. His departure had made the club environment more welcoming for everyone, demonstrating Sarah's commitment to maintaining standards of behavior that protected all members and staff. The broader community had also benefited from the lessons learned during our family crisis. Sarah's willingness to discuss wealth inequality and social mobility had inspired other club members to examine their own assumptions about economic differences. Several new scholarship programs and mentorship initiatives had been established as direct results of conversations that began with our family's public confrontation. My students had unknowingly benefited from the personal growth I had experienced through this challenging period. My increased confidence and clearer sense of purpose had made me a more effective teacher, while the resources provided by Sarah's foundation had allowed me to offer opportunities I could never have provided on a teacher's salary alone. But perhaps most importantly, our experience had taught us that love can overcome fear. Understanding can bridge economic differences, and families can grow stronger through honest confrontation with their own prejudices and limitations. As we prepared to leave the boardroom after finalizing the foundation paperwork, Sarah turned to my parents with a smile that held no trace of the pain they had once caused her. "I want you to know that I consider myself incredibly fortunate to be joining your family," she said warmly. "Ned learned his values from watching both of you work hard and sacrifice for his education and opportunities. Those are the qualities that made me fall in love with him." Mom and Dad's response showed how completely their perspective had changed over the past 6 months. Instead of feeling diminished by Sarah's wealth or intimidated by her generosity, they had learned to appreciate her character and to take pride in their son's ability to inspire such devotion from someone with unlimited choices. As we walked through the club's main dining room toward the exit, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The confrontation that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually been necessary for our family's growth and healing. Without that crisis, we might have continued building relationships on false foundations of pretense and assumption. The evening that had begun with my parents demanding Sarah's removal from the club was ending with all of us working together to remove barriers that prevented other young people from achieving their educational dreams. The transformation was complete, profound, and deeply satisfying for everyone involved. Sarah and I were married 3 months later in a ceremony that celebrated love triumphing over fear, understanding, overcoming prejudice, and family bonds growing stronger through honest confrontation with difficult truths. My parents served as enthusiastic hosts, welcoming guests with genuine warmth and pride in their new daughter-in-law's character rather than her wealth. The life lesson that emerged from our experience was simple but powerful. Authentic relationships require the courage to see past surface differences and the wisdom to judge people by their character rather than their circumstances. When we approach others with genuine openness instead of defensive assumptions, we create possibilities for connection and growth that can transform entire families and communities. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or social status, but in the quality of relationships we build and the positive impact we have on others' lives. Sarah had taught us that having resources means nothing without the wisdom and generosity to use them for creating joy, opportunity, and hope in the world around us. That's the story of how my family learned the difference between belonging somewhere and actually deserving to be there, and how love proved stronger than fear when we finally had the courage to choose connection over conflict. Before I close this story, I'd love to hear from all of you who've listened. Have you ever experienced a moment when your assumptions about someone were completely wrong? Maybe a time when fear or insecurity caused you to judge someone unfairly? Share your story in the comments below because I think we all have moments when we've let our prejudices cloud our judgment. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to let me know it made an impact. Subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family, relationships, and personal growth. And if you think someone else could benefit from hearing about how love and understanding can overcome fear and prejudice, please share this story with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovery about what really matters in life and relationships. I hope your own story is filled with the kind of authentic connections that make all the difference. Until next time, remember that the people who challenge our assumptions might just be the ones who change our lives for the better.